The day I turned 78, I thought I was going to die. Not because I was sick. Not because I was old. But because, for the first time in my life, I looked into my children's eyes and saw something that chilled me more than death itself. I saw impatience. I saw greed. And I saw the kind of smiles people wear when they're waiting for something to end. I didn't understand it then. But a nurse named Emily did. And before everything fell apart, she leaned close to my hospital bed and whispered 6 words that changed my life forever. Don't trust your family, Mrs. Carter. At first, I thought she was crazy. I wish she had been. My name is Margaret Carter. For most of my life, I believed I was blessed. I had 3 children. Daniel, Susan, and Michael. After my husband Robert passed away 12 years ago, they became my entire world. I never remarried. Never even dated. I spent every holiday waiting for their visits. Every birthday hoping they'd come. Every evening sitting by the window looking for their cars. Sometimes they showed up. Most times they didn't. Still, I loved them. A mother's heart doesn't stop loving just because it gets ignored. If anything, it loves harder. I made excuses for everything. They're busy. They have families. They'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow often became weeks. Weeks became months. But I kept believing. Then one winter morning, everything changed. I was walking to my mailbox. Snow covered the sidewalk. I remember smiling because Robert used to love snow. The next thing I remember was pain. A terrible pain. The ground rushed toward me. My hip exploded with agony. I screamed. No one heard. For almost an hour I lay in the freezing cold. My body shaking. My tears freezing on my cheeks. I remember looking up at the gray sky and whispering, "Robert, not yet." Eventually, a neighbor found me. An ambulance arrived. The siren screamed through the neighborhood. And suddenly my quiet life turned into hospital rooms and surgery schedules. The doctors said I'd broken my hip badly. Recovery would take months. Maybe longer. I was terrified. Not because of the pain. Because I hated being a burden. When my children arrived, they looked concerned. At least at first. Daniel hugged me. Susan kissed my forehead. Michael squeezed my hand. For a moment, I felt safe. For a moment, I felt loved. Then I started noticing things. Little things. Strange things. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Whispers in hallways. Expressions changing when they thought I wasn't looking. One afternoon, I woke from a nap. The room door wasn't completely closed. Outside, I heard Daniel speaking. "I don't know how long this is going to take." Susan sighed heavily. "Months probably." Michael groaned. "God, that's going to be expensive." I felt something crack inside me. Not my hip. My heart. I waited for one of them to say they were worried about me. None of them did. The conversation turned toward my house. My savings. My insurance. Money. 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 I stared at the ceiling. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I was tired. Maybe pain medication was making me paranoid. That's what I told myself. Because believing the truth hurt too much. The next morning, a nurse walked into my room. She looked about 30. Warm eyes. Gentle smile. Her name tag read Emily. Unlike everyone else, she talked to me like I mattered. Not like I was another patient. Not like I was a problem. She asked about Robert. She listened to my stories. She laughed when I told her about the time Robert accidentally set our barbecue on fire. I found myself laughing too. The kind of laugh that brings tears to your eyes. The kind that reminds you you're still alive. Days passed. Emily became my favorite part of every morning. Then something happened. One evening she entered my room looking troubled. Not scared. Troubled. Like someone carrying a secret. She checked my chart. Adjusted my blanket. Then glanced toward the hallway. Her smile disappeared. Slowly, she stepped closer. Much closer. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Mrs. Carter. I blinked. Yes? She hesitated. I could see a battle happening behind her eyes. Then she leaned down. What she said next made my blood run cold. Don't trust your family. I stared at her. Certain I'd heard wrong. What? Her face had turned pale. She looked toward the door again. Then back at me. They've been asking questions. What questions? Questions about my assets. My accounts. My house. Things no loving child should be worried about while their mother was recovering from surgery. My hands began shaking. No. Emily looked heartbroken. I shouldn't even be telling you this. My chest tightened. Suddenly I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't understand. Then she said something that terrified me even more. They're planning something. And at that moment, I realized my nightmare was only beginning. What if the people you trusted most were already planning your future, without you in it? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, Emily's words echoed through my mind. Don't trust your family. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to believe she was mistaken. After all, these were my children. The babies I had carried. The children whose nightmares I chased away. The little hands I had held crossing busy streets. How could they possibly want to hurt me? By morning, I convinced myself Emily had misunderstood something. There had to be another explanation. There simply had to be. Then Susan arrived. She walked into my room carrying flowers. Beautiful white lilies. My favorite. The sight almost made me cry. Maybe Emily was wrong. Maybe everything was fine. Susan smiled. Morning, Mom. Morning, sweetheart. She kissed my cheek. For a moment, I felt relieved. Then she sat beside my bed and pulled out a folder. A thick folder. My stomach tightened. Mom, while you're recovering, Daniel and I thought we should help organize some paperwork. Paperwork. Not recovery. Not my health. Paperwork. I forced a smile. What kind of paperwork? Oh, nothing important. She laughed nervously. The sound felt strange. Artificial. Like an actress reading lines. We just want to make things easier for everyone. Everyone. Not me. Everyone. She opened the folder. Inside were property documents. Bank forms. Insurance records. I recognized them instantly. My hands began trembling. Where did you get those? Oh, Daniel found them in your filing cabinet. My heart skipped. They had been inside my house. Going through my private documents. Without asking. Susan kept talking. Words poured out of her mouth. But all I could hear was Emily's warning. Something wasn't right. Something was terribly wrong. Then Susan pointed to a page. If you sign here, it would make managing things much easier. I looked down. Power of attorney. My blood turned cold. I wasn't dying. I wasn't mentally impaired. I was recovering from a broken hip. Yet somehow my children wanted legal control over my finances. My voice came out shaky. I'll think about it. The smile disappeared from Susan's face. Only for a second. But I saw it. A flash of irritation. Then it vanished. Replaced by sweetness. Oh, of course, Mom. That was when I knew. Emily wasn't imagining things. Later that afternoon, I pretended to sleep. Daniel and Michael entered the room. Neither realized I was awake. They stood near the window, speaking quietly. But not quietly enough. "What happened?" Michael whispered. "She didn't sign." A long silence followed. Then Michael cursed under his breath. My heart pounded. Daniel sounded frustrated. "We need her to do it before she leaves the hospital." "Maybe Susan pushed too hard." Daniel sighed. "I don't care how it happens." Then came the sentence that shattered what remained of my heart. "We've waited long enough." Waited long enough. Waited for what? For me to recover? Or for me to disappear? Tears slid silently down my cheeks. I kept my eyes closed. Kept pretending to sleep. Because if they saw me crying, I knew I wouldn't survive the conversation that followed. That evening Emily returned. The moment she saw my face, she knew. "You heard something." I nodded. The tears started again. I hated crying. But at 78 years old, there are moments when the pain simply overwhelms dignity. Emily sat beside me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, I whispered. "What did I do wrong?" She looked confused. "What? What did I do to make them become this way?" My voice broke. "I loved them." The tears came harder. "I gave them everything." I couldn't stop. The grief had been building for years. Years of loneliness. Years of excuses. Years of pretending I wasn't abandoned. And now the truth was standing right in front of me. Emily squeezed my hand. "Sometimes kindness hurts more than cruelty. Because it reminds you what you've been missing. You didn't do anything wrong." I stared at her. "My husband worked 2 jobs." I swallowed hard. "We sacrificed everything." The memories flooded back. Robert carrying sleeping children from the car. Christmas mornings. Birthday cakes. Family vacations. Laughter. Love. A lifetime of love. How had it ended here? How had it ended in a hospital room where strangers cared more about me than my own children? That night, Emily brought me tea. Not hospital tea. Real tea. The kind I loved. She wasn't supposed to. But she did. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. A real smile. She laughed. "There it is." "What?" "Your smile." I chuckled through tears. "You make me sound ancient." She grinned. "You are ancient." I gasped dramatically. She burst into laughter. And suddenly I found myself laughing too. The kind of laugh that sneaks up on you after days of crying. The kind that feels almost illegal when your heart is broken. For a few precious minutes, I forgot my pain. Forgot my children. Forgot my fear. Then Emily became serious again. "Margaret." The way she said my name made me nervous. "What is it?" She looked toward the door. Then lowered her voice. "I need to tell you something else." My stomach dropped. "What?" She hesitated. For the first time since we'd met, she looked genuinely frightened. I overheard another conversation. My pulse quickened. "Between who?" "Your son Daniel and someone from a care facility." The room suddenly felt colder. Much colder. "What kind of facility?" Emily's eyes filled with sympathy. The answer came quietly. Painfully. Like a knife sliding into my heart. "A nursing home." I stared at her. Unable to breathe. Unable to move. Unable to think. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. "They're planning where to send you after you're discharged." And the worst part? They weren't looking at places near my home. They were looking at places hundreds of miles away. Far enough that nobody would ever have to visit. They were already choosing a nursing home for me, but what I discovered next was far worse. The words echoed in my head all night. They're planning where to send you. Not asking me. Not discussing it with me. Planning it. Like I was furniture. Like I was a problem to be moved. Like my life belonged to someone else. I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The hospital room was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. Not because I had nobody. Because the people I had trusted most no longer felt like family. I kept remembering birthdays. School plays. Christmas mornings. The time Daniel fell off his bicycle and cried in my arms. The night Susan had a fever and I stayed awake for 36 hours straight. The afternoon Michael came home heartbroken after his first girlfriend left him. I had been there for every tear. Every failure. Every fear. Yet somehow, when I needed them most, they were discussing where to put me. A strange numbness settled over me. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. The feeling that comes when your heart finally begins accepting a truth it has spent years avoiding. The next morning, Daniel arrived. Alone. Carrying coffee. His smile looked polished. Practiced. Like he'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Morning, Mom. I smiled back. A weak smile. The kind people wear when they already know they're being lied to. He sat down. For several minutes he talked about weather. Traffic. His job. Anything except me. Then finally he got to the point. Mom, we've been discussing your recovery. There it was. The real reason for the visit. I nodded. Oh? We just want what's best for you. Funny how dangerous conversations always begin with those words. What's best for you? Daniel leaned forward. You won't be able to live alone anymore. The certainty in his voice irritated me. Not might. Not maybe. Won't. As though the decision had already been made. I haven't finished rehabilitation yet. He smiled. But we have to be realistic. Realistic. The word felt like an insult. For 78 years I had survived everything life threw at me. Poverty. Loss. Grief. Widowhood. And now my own son was talking to me like I couldn't decide whether to tie my own shoes. I'll decide what's realistic when the time comes. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But mothers notice everything. Especially when their children are lying. The conversation ended quickly after that. And Daniel left looking annoyed. Not concerned. Not worried. Annoyed. As soon as he disappeared, Emily entered. One look at me and she sighed. Bad visit? I laughed bitterly. Apparently I'm incapable of living. Emily rolled her eyes. You look pretty alive to me. That made me smile. A small one. But genuine. Then she sat beside me. Something about her seemed different. More serious. More cautious. Margaret. My stomach tightened immediately. Whenever she used that tone. Bad news followed. What happened? She glanced toward the doorway. Nobody was there. Then she reached into her pocket. My heart began racing. What is that? A copy. A copy of what? Emily swallowed. For a moment she looked uncertain. Like she was debating whether she should continue. Then she handed me several folded papers. I opened them. And froze. They weren't nursing home brochures. They weren't medical documents. They were property records. My property records. My house. My eyes widened. What am I looking at? Emily pointed to a section near the bottom. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time. My hands began shaking. No. The word escaped my mouth before I realized I'd spoken. No. Emily looked heartbroken. The document showed an estimated market value of my home. Recent assessments. Potential sale projections. Projected profits. It looked less like family planning and more like preparation for a business transaction. Tears filled my eyes. They're planning to sell it. Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. I stared at the paper. That house wasn't just a building. It was my life. Robert and I bought it when we were 23. We painted every wall together. Raised our children there. Celebrated birthdays there. Buried pets in the backyard. Cried there. Laughed there. Loved there. Every room held memories. Every corner contained a piece of my life. And now someone was calculating its value. Like it was nothing more than numbers on a page. A tear landed on the document. Then another. Then another. I couldn't stop them. Emily moved her chair closer. For several minutes I simply cried. The deep kind of crying. The kind that comes from somewhere ancient. Somewhere beneath words. Eventually I managed to speak. I thought they loved that house. Emily squeezed my hand. They probably loved what it represented. The truth of that sentence hit hard. Maybe they didn't see memories. Maybe they saw money. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Visitors came and went. Doctors checked on me. Therapists worked with me. But my mind remained trapped inside those documents. That evening something unexpected happened. A young volunteer entered my room carrying a guitar. He couldn't have been older than 20. Mind if I play a few songs? Normally I would have said no. But I was exhausted. So I nodded. He sat near the window and started playing old songs. Songs Robert used to sing. Songs I hadn't heard in years. At first I listened quietly. Then one particular song began. Our song. Mine and Robert's. The song that played at our wedding. The song we danced to on our 50th anniversary. Suddenly I was crying again. Not from sadness this time. From memory. From love. From missing someone so deeply that even after 12 years, the wound still felt fresh. The volunteer noticed. He stopped playing. I'm sorry. I wiped my eyes. No. My voice cracked. Keep playing. So he did. And for a few beautiful minutes, I could almost feel Robert beside me. Smiling. Holding my hand. Telling me everything would be okay. When the song ended, I whispered something I hadn't said aloud in years. I miss you. The room was silent. And somehow, in that silence, I felt an answer. Not words. Just a feeling. A reminder. Robert had always told me one thing. Margaret, never let anyone make you small. The memory hit me like lightning. Suddenly I sat up straighter. Suddenly something changed inside me. For days I'd been acting like a victim. A helpless old woman. But I wasn't helpless. I was Margaret Carter. And if my children thought they could decide my future without me, they were about to learn something. Their mother wasn't finished fighting. Because later that night, while reviewing my medical paperwork, I accidentally discovered a document that wasn't supposed to be in my file. A document containing a signature. A signature that looked exactly like mine. Except I had never signed it. And when I read what the document authorized, my blood turned to ice. The signature looked exactly like mine, except I had never signed it. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. The hospital room felt strangely quiet. Too quiet. My hands trembled as I stared at the paper. I blinked. Then blinked again. The signature was mine. Or at least it appeared to be. Every curve. Every letter. Every tiny flourish at the end of my last name. Perfect. Almost perfect. Because something was wrong. I knew my own signature the way a person knows their own face. You don't study it. You simply know it. And this wasn't mine. It was a copy. A very good copy. But a copy nonetheless. A cold wave of fear washed over me. At 78 years old, I had learned that instinct is usually right. And my instinct was screaming. Something terrible was happening. The document authorized financial management authority. Temporary authority. Enough authority to access information. Enough authority to make decisions. Enough authority to begin transferring control. My chest tightened. Someone had forged my name. Someone. Or several someones. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls seemed closer. I couldn't breathe. I pressed the nurse call button. Minutes later, Emily entered. The second she saw my face, she knew. What happened? I handed her the paper. She read it. Then read it again. The color drained from her face. Where did you find this? It was mixed into my file. Emily sat down slowly. The look in her eyes frightened me more than the document. Because she looked like someone whose worst fears had just been confirmed. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Finally I whispered. I'm not crazy, am I? Emily looked directly into my eyes. No. That single word nearly made me cry. Because for days I had been questioning myself. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe I was emotional. Maybe age was affecting my judgment. But now? Now I knew. Something was very wrong. That evening I couldn't stop shaking. Every memory suddenly looked different. Every conversation. Every visit. Every suspicious smile. Had this been happening longer than I realized? How many decisions had been made behind my back? How many plans had already been put into motion? The questions wouldn't stop. Hours later, long after sunset, another visitor arrived. Not one of my children. My granddaughter. Emma. 22 years old. Bright. Kind. The only grandchild who still called regularly. The only one who remembered birthdays without reminders. The moment she entered the room, she rushed over and hugged me. A real hug. The kind that comes from love. Not obligation. Not guilt. Love. And suddenly I broke. The tears came so hard I couldn't stop them. Emma looked alarmed. Grandma? I grabbed her hand. Sweetheart. My voice cracked. I need to ask you something. She nodded immediately. Anything. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to know. But another part desperately needed the truth. Have your parents been talking about me? Emma froze. Just for a second. But it was enough. My heart sank. She knew something. Emma. The tears returned. Please. Her eyes filled with tears too. The poor girl looked trapped. Like someone standing between loyalty and honesty. Finally she sat beside me. And whispered. Grandma. I didn't know how to tell you. The room seemed to stop moving. My pulse thundered in my ears. What? Emma looked down. Then back at me. And what she said next shattered me. I heard them talking at Uncle Michael's house. A knot formed in my stomach. What were they saying? Emma swallowed hard. They were arguing over your house. I closed my eyes. The pain hit instantly. Not surprise. Confirmation. The worst kind of pain. She continued. Uncle Michael wanted to sell it immediately. A tear rolled down my cheek. Your mom? Emma's voice grew softer. She thought it might be worth more if they waited. Weighted. Worth more. They were discussing my home like investors discussing stock prices. I felt physically sick. Emma started crying. Real crying. The kind that comes from heartbreak. I'm sorry. She squeezed my hand tightly. So sorry. Suddenly, I wasn't crying for myself anymore. I was crying because she was. Because this beautiful young woman was carrying guilt for something she hadn't done. I pulled her into a hug. And for several minutes we simply sat there crying together. 2 generations. 1 broken family. Eventually Emma wiped her eyes. Then she said something unexpected. Grandma? Yes? If Grandpa was here. Her voice broke. I smiled through tears. I know. She laughed softly. A sad laugh. He'd be furious. That made me laugh too. A real laugh. Brief. But real. Because she was right. Robert would have terrified all 3 of them. The thought brought warmth to my chest. For the first time in days, I felt him again. Not physically. But spiritually. Like his strength was somehow still with me. Then Emma reached into her purse. There's something else. My heart immediately dropped. What? She pulled out her phone. Opened a photo. And handed it to me. The image nearly stopped my heart. It showed my son Daniel. Susan. Michael. And a real estate agent. Standing in front of my house. Smiling. Looking very pleased with themselves. The photo had been taken 3 weeks earlier. While I was still recovering. While nobody had discussed any sale with me. While I still legally owned everything. I stared at the screen. Unable to speak. Unable to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed something. A sign. A small sign resting inside the real estate agent's vehicle. Partially visible. But visible enough. 3 words. 3 words that changed everything. Coming soon listing. My house. My home. The place Robert and I built together. They had already started preparing to sell it. Without my permission. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. And at that exact moment, something inside me finally snapped. Not my heart. Not my spirit. My fear. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. And the next morning, I made a phone call that would change all of their lives forever. The next morning, I made 1 phone call, and everything my children had planned began to fall apart. I didn't tell anyone. Not Daniel. Not Susan. Not Michael. Not even Emily. For the first time in weeks, I kept my thoughts to myself. Because I had finally realized something important. The people around me had been making plans in secret. Now it was my turn. The sun had barely risen when I reached for my phone. My hands were steady. Steadier than they had been in days. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. The office of my attorney. A man named Richard Bennett. Richard had handled Robert's estate when my husband died. He knew our family. He knew our history. And most importantly, he knew me. When his assistant answered, I explained who I was. Within 10 minutes, Richard himself was on the line. Margaret? His voice immediately softened. My goodness. How are you? The kindness nearly made me cry. Almost. But not quite. I had shed enough tears. Now I needed answers. I need your help. The seriousness in my voice must have alarmed him. Because he immediately replied. Tell me everything. And I did. Every suspicious conversation. Every document. Every nursing home discussion. The forged signature. The real estate agent. The photograph Emma showed me. Everything. When I finished, silence filled the line. A long silence. The kind lawyers make when they're trying very hard not to say exactly what they're thinking. Finally Richard spoke. And his voice sounded colder than I had ever heard it. Margaret. Yes? If everything you've told me is accurate. My heart pounded. Your children may have created very serious legal problems for themselves. For the first time in weeks, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Tiny. Fragile. But real. Richard continued. I want you to sign nothing. All right. Agree to nothing. Okay. And tell nobody we spoke. That last instruction surprised me. Why? His answer was immediate. Because I want to know how far they're willing to go. A chill ran through me. How far? The words lingered. Because deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Yet part of me already did. Richard promised to visit the hospital personally the next day. After hanging up, I sat quietly, watching sunlight spill through the window. For the first time since my accident, I felt something lifting off my shoulders. The helplessness. The fear. The constant dread. It wasn't gone. But it was weakening. A few hours later, Daniel arrived. Followed by Susan. Then Michael. The entire trio. That alone felt suspicious. The moment they entered the room, I knew something was coming. The smiles were too bright. Too rehearsed. Too perfect. Susan carried coffee. Michael carried pastries. Daniel carried a folder. Of course he did. I almost laughed. If the situation hadn't been so heartbreaking, it would have been funny. Daniel sat beside my bed. We wanted to discuss something. There it was. The performance had begun. I nodded politely. What is it? He opened the folder. Inside were glossy brochures. Photographs. Information packets. Maps. My stomach sank. Nursing homes. Exactly as Emily had warned. Michael pointed to one photograph. Look at this place. Susan smiled. It's beautiful. Beautiful. The building looked like a prison with flowers. I stared silently. Daniel continued. They have excellent care. I said nothing. Susan leaned forward. And it would really reduce your stress. My stress. Interesting. Not theirs. Mine. The lies had become almost insulting. Then Michael said something he immediately regretted. It just makes more financial sense. The room froze. He realized his mistake instantly. Susan shot him a look. Daniel looked ready to strangle him. But the damage was done. I smiled. A calm smile. The kind that frightened people. Financial sense for who? Nobody answered. The silence was deafening. I looked at each of them. One by one. For the first time in years, I truly saw them. Not as my children. As adults. Adults making choices. Adults responsible for their actions. Adults who had mistaken kindness for weakness. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom. No. The word surprised even me. It came out firm. Sharp. Strong. No hesitation. No apology. Just no. The room became incredibly quiet. Susan blinked. Michael stared. Daniel looked confused. As though he'd forgotten I was capable of disagreeing. I repeated myself. No. The second time sounded even stronger. Something changed in their faces. For years I had been the mother who forgave everything. The mother who accepted excuses. The mother who kept giving. Now suddenly that woman was gone. And they didn't know what to do. Michael stood up. Frustrated. You're being unreasonable. I laughed. Actually laughed. A genuine laugh. The irony was almost too much. Unreasonable? After they planned my future behind my back? After they discussed selling my home? After someone forged my signature? Unreasonable. The word was almost funny. I shook my head. No, Michael. My voice remained calm. For the first time in my life, I'm being very reasonable. His face turned red. Susan looked nervous. Daniel looked worried. Not worried about me. Worried about losing control. And suddenly I saw it. For weeks I had wondered why they were pushing so hard. Now I understood. Because they thought I was vulnerable. And vulnerable people are easier to manipulate. Except I wasn't vulnerable anymore. That evening, after they left, Emma visited. When I told her about the conversation, she burst out laughing. The kind of laugh that comes when justice finally starts showing up. You should have seen their faces. I smiled. I did. We laughed together. Really laughed. For the first time since this nightmare began. And it felt wonderful. But the biggest surprise arrived the following afternoon. Richard came to the hospital. And after reviewing every document, after examining every piece of evidence, after hearing everything, he looked directly at me. Then quietly said the sentence that changed the entire story. Margaret. I held my breath. Richard adjusted his glasses. Then smiled. A very dangerous smile. The kind lawyers were when they'd discovered something important. Something devastating. Something powerful. And then he revealed a secret my children had absolutely no idea existed. A secret Robert and I had protected for nearly 20 years. A secret worth millions. The secret worth millions wasn't hidden in a bank account. It was hidden in a decision my husband made before he died. For several seconds, I simply stared at Richard. My heart pounded. Emma sat beside me, looking just as confused. Richard's smile remained calm. Patient. Almost amused. Finally, I spoke. Richard, what secret? He leaned back in his chair. Then folded his hands. Do you remember the investment Robert made in 2007? The question caught me off guard. I blinked. Then suddenly remembered. A small investment. One everyone had criticized. Even our children. Especially our children. I laughed softly. Oh, that thing. Richard nodded. That thing. Years ago, Robert had sold a piece of land he inherited from his father. Instead of spending the money, he invested it. Nobody understood why. Daniel called it stupid. Michael called it risky. Susan said he was wasting their inheritance. I still remembered the argument. Robert had simply smiled. The same stubborn smile he always wore. Then he'd said something I never forgot. This isn't for them. At the time, I thought he meant retirement. Apparently, I was wrong. Richard opened his briefcase. Pulled out several documents. And placed them on my hospital table. Robert's investment grew. I smiled. I know. No. His smile widened. You don't. My stomach fluttered. The room suddenly felt smaller. What do you mean? Richard slid the papers toward me. I adjusted my glasses. Then looked down. And nearly dropped them. The number didn't make sense. I read it again. And again. And again. Millions. Not thousands. Millions. My mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. Emma gasped so loudly that people probably heard it in the hallway. Oh my God. Richard nodded. Exactly. I felt dizzy. Not because of the money. Because Robert had never told me. Not completely. I remembered him saying he wanted me protected. I remembered him making appointments with lawyers. I remembered him updating paperwork. But I never imagined this. Never. Richard continued. There's something else. Of course there was. At this point, I wasn't sure my heart could take another surprise. What now? His expression became serious. The trust. I frowned. What trust? That answer shocked him. You didn't know? Apparently not. Richard looked genuinely surprised. Then he explained. 20 years earlier, Robert had created a trust. A very specific trust. A trust containing nearly all of those investments. And the conditions attached to it were unlike anything I'd ever heard. The money belonged entirely to me while I was alive. Every dollar. Every asset. Every investment. Nobody could touch it. Nobody. Not Daniel. Not Susan. Not Michael. Not anyone. I smiled. That sounded exactly like Robert. Protective until the very end. Then Richard continued. The second condition is even more interesting. My eyebrows rose. There's more? He nodded. A lot more. I braced myself. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. If your children attempt to manipulate, pressure, exploit, deceive, or financially control you. He paused. Emma leaned forward. So? Richard smiled. Their inheritance disappears. Silence. Complete silence. Then Emma burst out laughing. Not a polite laugh. Not a small laugh. A full, unstoppable laugh. The kind that makes your stomach hurt. Soon I was laughing too. Tears streamed down my face. Not tears of pain. Not tears of heartbreak. Tears of pure disbelief. Robert. That stubborn, brilliant man. Even 12 years after his death, he was still protecting me. Still looking after me. Still one step ahead. When the laughter finally faded, I started crying. Deeply. Quietly. Emotionally. Because suddenly I missed him more than ever. I looked toward the window. Toward the sunlight. And whispered. You knew. In my heart, I could almost hear him laughing. Of course he knew. He always knew. A week later, Richard arranged a meeting. My children arrived expecting another conversation about recovery. Instead, they found attorneys. Documents. Evidence. And consequences. The expressions on their faces changed quickly. Confusion. Shock. Fear. Then panic. Especially when Richard presented the forged signature. The nursing home plans. The property discussions. The witness statements. Everything. Every single thing. Nobody shouted. Nobody argued. Because there was nothing to argue about. The facts spoke for themselves. Then Richard explained the trust. I will never forget their faces. Never. Daniel looked pale. Susan started crying. Michael looked like someone had punched him. And when they learned the inheritance could vanish completely because of their actions. The room became very quiet. For the first time in years, they weren't talking about money. They were staring at the consequences of their choices. Months passed. My recovery continued. Slowly. Painfully. But steadily. I eventually returned home. My home. The home Robert and I built. The home nobody sold. The home nobody took away. Emily visited often. In fact, she became family. The kind of family connected by love rather than blood. Emma visited every weekend. Sometimes we baked. Sometimes we watched old movies. Sometimes we laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks. The good kind of tears. As for my children, things didn't magically heal. Real life rarely works that way. Trust, once broken, doesn't return overnight. It returns through actions. Through accountability. Through time. Daniel eventually apologized. A real apology. Not excuses. Not explanations. An apology. Susan followed months later. Then Michael. Their apologies didn't erase the pain. But they mattered. Because for the first time, they were honest. Years later, people still ask me what I learned from everything that happened. My answer never changes. Family is not measured by who shares your blood. Family is measured by who protects your heart when it is vulnerable. Sometimes strangers become family. Sometimes family becomes strangers. And sometimes the person who saves your life isn't the doctor. It's the nurse who quietly leans close and whispers the truth. The day Emily told me not to trust my family, I thought she was destroying my world. In reality, she was saving it. Because the truth hurt. But the lie would have destroyed me. And every evening now, I sit on my porch. Watching sunsets. Thinking about Robert. Smiling. Because even after all these years, he kept his promise. He protected me. And in the end, love protected me too.